You ever have that feeling like something's watching you, but there's no one there? Like the room is quiet, but it knows something about you? I need you to stay with me right now, because what I'm about to tell you is not just some crazy sci-fi made-up tale. This is a story of a hero who had everything. A name people knew, powers people feared, a heart people trusted, but lost it all in one blink when the very world he protected turned into his prison. Not a prison with bars or guards. No, something far worse. A prison made of reflections, of lies, of infinite versions of himself, each one twisted darker and more dangerous than the last. You clicked this video because you want to know, can he escape? That's what we're going to find out. And I promise you, by the end of this, you'll know more than just the answer. You'll feel like you were there with him, every second, every heartbeat. But if you think this is just about powers or punches, nah, this is psychological. This is survival. And if you're into superhero theories, multiverse breakdowns, and hidden Easter eggs, you're exactly who the story is meant for. So don't scroll, don't click away, because the deeper we go, the more you'll see. It's not just about escaping a mirror, it's about escaping yourself. They called him Nova Sentinel, a name that once echoed across cities like a siren of hope. Towering buildings bore his insignia. Kids wore his symbol like a badge of honor. His powers? Energy manipulation, enhanced perception, and near flight. But more than that, he had clarity, a gift of insight into the intentions of others, which made him the perfect protector. Until the day he touched the wrong artifact. It wasn't glowing or pulsing with power like you'd expect. It was silent, still, a mirror embedded in an ancient wall deep beneath an abandoned subway system. It didn't shimmer. It whispered. And Nova, being who he was, didn't ignore it. He reached out and vanished. Just like that. To the world, he was gone. But he wasn't dead. He'd slipped through the veil into something we still don't fully understand. A mirror universe where things looked the same, but felt off. Where every rule was reversed and the truth was twisted. Inside this parallel world, the streets were colder, quieter. Reflections didn't follow your movements. They led them. People knew his name, but not as a hero, as a tyrant. Statues of him, carved in black steel, stood in the town squares, their eyes hollow and hateful. Screens displayed footage of him doing terrible things. Things he'd never done, but things his mirror self had. In this dimension, Nova Sentinel was not a savior. He was a destroyer. And he was still out there, alive, watching, waiting. That's when it hit him. This wasn't just a mirror world. It was a trap set by someone or something that understood the deepest parts of him. Someone who knew that to truly break a hero, you don't chain his body. You chain his identity. Now stay with me, because this is where it gets darker and deeper. Every time Nova tried to escape, he found himself right back where he started. Streets folding in on themselves. Buildings rearranging like a puzzle he couldn't solve. And worse, people from his own life started showing up. Friends, enemies, even the woman he once loved. But none of them were real. They were reflections, too, but they knew things, personal things no one else should. They spoke in riddles, revealing secrets Nova had buried so deep even he forgot them. One version of his mentor told him, every exit is an entrance, every truth a lie. To leave, you must accept who you are or destroy who you were. What does that even mean, right? But that's the point. The mirror doesn't want to make sense. It wants to hold you. Meanwhile, back in the real world, rumors started swirling. Some claimed to see Nova in strange places, flickering like a glitch. Others reported distorted reflections of themselves doing things they hadn't done. Viral videos popped up showing people being pulled into mirrors across cities. Search trends exploded. Superhero trapped in multiverse, dark mirror universe theory, alternate dimension real footage. Is Nova Sentinel still alive? People didn't know what to believe. But one thing was certain, whatever this mirror dimension was, it wasn't staying hidden much longer. And if Nova couldn't find a way out, it might break through to us. This is where we need to talk about something important. You see, this story, it's not just about a hero. It's about us. Every one of us has our own reflection. And sometimes what we see in that mirror isn't just reversed. It's revealing. What if there's a version of you somewhere, living out all the choices you didn't make, loving who you didn't love, hurting who you protected? Would you fight that version, or would you become it? That's the question Nova's facing every second. He's not just fighting monsters or clones. He's fighting versions of himself, each one a mirror held to a part of his soul he never wanted to look at. But now let's flip the lens. Because while Nova's trying to navigate the madness, another force is watching him. An entity that doesn't just live in a mirror world. It feeds on it. It's called a fracture. No one knows where it came from, but it manifests as a crack in reality, widening every time Nova makes a choice. It's not a creature. It's a consequence. The more Nova struggles to stay good, the more fracture pulls his darkness to the surface. And the worst part? It can reach across realities. In our world, people have started seeing things they shouldn't. Glitches, duplicates, echoes. You ever feel like you're living a day twice, or see someone who looks just like you on a security cam when you know you weren't there? That's not your mind playing tricks. That's the mirror leaking. And just when Nova thinks he's made progress, he finds the kid, a boy with no name, no family, just a voice in his head telling him where to go. This child can see through mirrors. He talks in code, draws symbols in chalk that match the ones on the mirror Nova touched. Who is he? Why does he know so much about Nova's past? The boy claims he was born in the mirror universe, but he's not part of it. He's a glitch, an error, and that error might be the only key to cracking the entire dimension apart. But at a cost Nova may not be ready to pay. Now, if you're still with me, and I hope you are, you're probably wondering, how does it end? But that's not the right question. The right question is, what will Nova become by the time he does escape? Because this place is changing him, slowly, and maybe permanently. He's not sleeping. He's seeing flashes of memories that aren't his. And his powers? They're starting to behave differently. Not just stronger, asterisk unpredictable star. Like the mirror version of him is leaking through. The moment he starts losing track of which world is real, that's when the mirror truly wins. So what happens when the only thing you can trust, asterisk yourself asterisk, becomes your biggest threat? What happens when the line between the hero and the villain is as thin as glass? That's the mystery. That's what you clicked this video for. And trust me, by the end, you'll have your answer. But right now, you need to see what happens next. Because Nova is about to face the one version of himself he never thought he'd see. The one who never wanted to escape. And that's where I'm leaving you for now. Because just as Nova reached the heart of the dimension, just as he opened that last door that pulsed with his own heartbeat, he saw something in the mirror that made him stop cold. It wasn't another version of him. It was you. But that part, that's coming in the next chapter. Stick around. You're going to need to see it for yourself. I'm glad you're still with me. I knew you want to know what happens next. After all, you didn't click on this video to hear about some random superhero and his doomed journey. No, you're here because this story, this universe, asterisk it matters star. And as the darkness in the mirror creeps ever closer, you'll realize just how far down the rabbit hole we're going. The twists, the mysteries, the unexplained events. It's going to mess with your mind in ways you won't see coming. Let's dive deeper into this world, and more importantly, into Nova's mind. Nova's sentinel stood before the mirror, his reflection twisted and distorted. But it wasn't his own reflection that froze him in place. It was the face of a stranger, someone who shouldn't have been there, someone whose eyes were dark like two bottomless pits. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light. The mirror, after all, wasn't just any ordinary piece of glass. It was something ancient, something that didn't just reflect light, it twisted it. And that's exactly what it did now. The stranger in the mirror was smiling, but it wasn't a smile of comfort or recognition. It was a smile of mockery, like it knew something he didn't, like it was taunting him. Nova stepped closer, reaching out with a trembling hand. The closer he got to the glass, the colder it felt, like a storm was brewing just beyond the surface. He looked into the mirror for too long, and in that instant he saw it, his own eyes, his own reflection, shifting ever so slightly. Not the reflection of the hero people had known. Not the Nova Sentinel that saved lives and stopped villains. No, this was something darker, something more terrifying. And as he stared, he felt his mind start to break apart, piece by piece, like a jigsaw puzzle torn up and scattered into 1,000 fragments. Each piece was a memory, a choice, a moment from his past, but now they were all distorted, reshaped into something he couldn't recognize. The mirror wasn't just showing him himself. It was showing him every possible version of himself, every choice he could have made, every mistake he'd ever regret. In the distance, he could hear the whispers again, soft, untraceable voices, as if the universe itself were trying to speak to him. But there was no time to listen. The mirror was calling. It was pulling him deeper, urging him to step through. Every instinct he had screamed at him to resist, to fight the pull. But something in the air felt different now. It was as though the very fabric of the dimension had shifted. And that shift had brought with it something new, something darker. Across the vast expanse of this strange world, Nova could feel the presence of the fracture growing stronger. It had been there from the moment he stepped into the mirror universe, a crack in reality itself that seemed to stretch and twist in ways no one fully understood. But with every choice Nova made, with every attempt to escape, the fracture seemed to draw closer, feeding off his fear, his confusion, his self-doubt. It was growing like a living thing, and Nova knew that if he didn't do something, he'd be swallowed by it completely. But escaping this twisted world wasn't going to be easy. The rules here were different. What used to be familiar now felt foreign, and the people he once trusted, friends, allies, even strangers, were all twisted versions of themselves. They spoke in riddles, in puzzles that Nova couldn't quite solve. And every time he thought he understood the rules of this world, they changed. It was a game, but he didn't know the rules. He was losing and fast. And then there was the boy. The boy had appeared out of nowhere. He wasn't part of this world, but he didn't belong to the real world either. A glitch, an anomaly. At first, Nova had dismissed him as just another hallucination, another trick the mirror played on him to mess with his mind. But the more he listened to the boy, the more he began to realize that this child wasn't just a figment of his imagination. He knew things no one should have known. He spoke in strange codes, scribbling symbols on the walls, guiding Nova toward places that didn't make sense, places that shouldn't exist. But every time Nova followed the boy's instructions, he found himself closer to the truth, closer to the source of the mirror universe. But the boy had a secret, something Nova wasn't ready to hear. And with every new revelation, the world around him seemed to collapse a little more, like a fragile house of cards ready to tumble. As Nova moved deeper into the mirror world, things started to get more intense. His powers, his energy manipulation, his ability to perceive the world around him, began to warp. They weren't behaving the way they used to. Sometimes they were too strong, overwhelming him, threatening to tear him apart. Other times, they were too weak, leaving him vulnerable to the twisted creatures that roamed this world. Creatures that weren't quite alive, but not quite dead either. Shadows that whispered his name in the darkness. Reflections of his own past mistakes come back to haunt him. And always in the background, the looming presence of the fracture, pulling at the edges of his reality. Nova had to act fast. He knew that if he didn't find a way out of this dimension soon, he'd be trapped here forever. But the more he searched, the more he realized that escape wasn't the answer. Not anymore. This mirror universe wasn't just a prison. It was a reflection of his soul, a place where every regret, every fear, every choice he'd ever made was brought to life. To escape this world, he'd have to face himself. And not just a hero everyone knew, the one who had saved cities and fought villains. No, he'd have to face the version of himself that he'd buried deep down, the version that wanted to be the villain. And that's where the true danger lay. The boy kept whispering things to him, strange phrases that didn't quite make sense. They were hints, clues, but there was always a cost. Every time Nova followed one of the boy's instructions, something changed. Something disappeared. People who had been with him vanished. Friends who had offered him comfort were gone in an instant, replaced by more dark reflections of himself, more twisted versions that seemed to mock him. It was as though every action Nova took only made the mirror world stronger, more alive. And the more he tried to understand, the more the mirror shifted. Now, he wasn't just trapped in a world of reflections. He was trapped in a world of echoes. Echoes of himself. Echoes of his decisions. Echoes of the life he might have had. Every time he thought he had a handle on things, the rules changed. The fracture grew stronger, and the boy's riddles grew more cryptic. Nova was on the brink, not just of physical exhaustion, but of mental collapse. He had no idea who to trust anymore, his allies, his enemies, or even himself. But the most terrifying realization came when Nova finally understood the boy's true role in all of this. The boy wasn't trying to help him. He wasn't leading him to the exit. No, the boy was a manifestation of the mirror world's will. The more Nova followed him, the deeper into the heart of the fracture he was being pulled. Nova had one choice left. Embrace the darkness inside him, face the version of himself that he had never wanted to see, and break free. Or he could be consumed by the fracture, lost in the mirror forever. The decision wasn't easy. And just as he thought he'd made up his mind, the mirror revealed something new, a reflection of himself he couldn't ignore. The image was staring back at him, smirking, a Nova he had never seen before, one with no hope, one that had already given up. And that's when the ground began to shake. The ground beneath Nova's feet trembled, the rumble in the mirror universe escalating to a deafening roar. His heart raced as the reflection in front of him, no, that version of him, smirked with an unshakable confidence, one that sent a cold wave through his entire being. Nova's legs felt like they were made of stone, as if the mirror was pulling him in, luring him into the abyss of his own darkest desires. For a moment, he stood there, paralyzed by the weight of the decision that lay before him. The reflections in the mirror weren't just shifting. They were alive, and they weren't letting him go. The fracture, the entity, the force that had been pulling at the edges of his consciousness for what seemed like an eternity, had now started to distort everything. Time, space, even the very rules that govern this universe, had become fluid, bending to something far more sinister than anything Nova could comprehend. The boy, the one who had been guiding him through this nightmare, seemed to fade in and out like a glitch in the system, and Nova began to wonder, was he even real? Or was he another trick of the mirror, another facet of Nova's fractured psyche? The boy had always spoken in riddles, but now his words seemed less like advice and more like command. Each time Nova took a step forward, each time he believed he was getting closer to understanding the universe around him, the boy's cryptic messages would only lead him into deeper chaos. But Nova couldn't stop. He couldn't let himself be consumed by doubt. He needed to move forward. But with every step he took, the world around him seemed to unravel further. The shadows stretched longer, twisting, contorting into figures that should not exist, creatures with eyes that glowed like burning embers, watching him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. His senses were assaulted from every angle. The air was thick with a cold, oppressive force, and the ground beneath him, once solid and firm, had become unstable, like quicksand pulling at his every move. Nova's powers were failing him. The energy manipulation that had once been his greatest asset was now unpredictable, turning on him like a wild storm. One moment, his hands crackled with enough power to shatter mountains, and the next, they were limp, powerless, as if the very fabric of the universe had decided to strip him of his greatest strength. He could feel it, the pull of the fracture growing stronger, almost as if it were a living, breathing entity. His entire existence seemed to be eroding, like a building collapsing under the weight of its own foundation. And the reflection, asterisk that reflection asterisk, was mocking him, twisted his every move, every decision, as if it knew what was to come, as if it was him in some other life, some other version of himself that had embraced the darkness and never looked back. Asterisk, you're not who you think you are. Asterisk, the reflection whispered, its voice distorted, echoing in the mirror's depths. Asterisk, you're just another part of the story. Another lie. Asterisk. Nova's mind reeled at the words. What was the mirror trying to tell him? Was it true? Was he not the hero he thought he was? Had he, too, fallen victim to the very thing he had fought against his whole life? The lure of darkness, the temptation to give in to the chaos? The weight of the question hung over him, suffocating him. He wanted to believe in himself, to hold on to the identity that had defined him for so long. But the longer he stared at the mirror, the more his resolve crumbled. Behind him, he heard the boy's voice, faint at first, but growing louder. Asterisk, you have to face it, Nova. Face the truth. It's the only way out. Asterisk, the boy's words echoed with an urgency that made Nova's stomach churn. The truth? What truth? The mirror universe was a place of lies, of twisted reflections and distorted realities. There was no truth here, only chaos. And then, without warning, the mirror shattered. A brilliant flash of light erupted from the depths of the mirror, blinding Nova momentarily. And when his vision cleared, he found himself no longer in a room with the mirror. Instead, he was standing on the edge of a vast, empty expanse, an endless void stretching out in all directions. The sky above was a swirling mass of colors, like oil on water, constantly shifting and changing, never staying still. The ground beneath him was made of jagged, sharp rocks that seemed to pulsate with dark energy, a heartbeat that thrummed in his chest. And in the distance, Nova could see a figure standing alone, silhouetted against the void. It was him. No, it wasn't him. It was the other version of himself. The Nova who had embraced the darkness, the one who had given in to the fracture, the one who had let the mirror consume him. This version of himself stood tall, confident, and unshaken. He looked back at Nova with an almost smug expression, as if he had known all along how this would play out. As if he were the true hero and Nova, the real Nova, was just an illusion, a fleeting fragment of a broken reality. Asterisk, so we meet at last, asterisk, the Dark Nova said, his voice smooth, almost mocking. Asterisk, I was wondering how long it would take for you to figure out. But here you are, standing before me, just like I knew you would, asterisk. Nova's breath caught in his throat as he stepped forward, his legs trembling, his heart racing. This was it. This was the moment he had feared, the moment when the mirror's reflection would become reality. Asterisk, no, asterisk, Nova whispered, his voice barely audible. Asterisk, I'm not you. Asterisk. The Dark Nova chuckled, a sound that sent chills down Nova's spine. Asterisk, oh, but you are. You always have been. You've been running from yourself, from the truth of who you really are. But there's no escaping it now. Asterisk, he took a step closer. His eyes glowed with a malevolent light. Asterisk, you think you're a hero? You think you're different from me? You're not. You've always been one bad choice away from becoming me. One mistake. One weakness. Asterisk. The words hit Nova like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of him. His knees buckled, and he fell to the ground, his hands gripping the jagged rocks beneath him for support. He had known, deep down, that something like this was coming. He had felt it, the darkness in him, the fear, the doubt, the urge to give in. And now, standing before him, was the culmination of everything he had fought against, the version of himself he had always feared, the real villain. But Nova didn't give up. Not yet. There was still hope. He could still fight. He could still choose to be better. With every ounce of strength he had left, Nova rose to his feet, glaring at the dark version of himself. Asterisk, you're wrong. Asterisk, he said, his voice trembling but resolute. Asterisk, I'm not like you. I'll never be like you. Asterisk. The Dark Nova's expression faltered for a moment, as if surprised by the defiance in Nova's voice. But then his smirk returned, even more menacing than before. Asterisk, we'll see about that. Asterisk, he whispered, his voice low and dangerous. And with that, the Dark Nova raised his hand, and the world around them began to collapse. The ground trembled beneath Nova's feet, and the very fabric of reality seemed to tear apart, the swirling colors of the sky warping and distorting. It was as if the universe itself was unraveling at the seams. And in that moment, Nova realized the true scope of the fracture's power. This wasn't just a battle for his soul. It was a battle for the very existence of everything he had ever known. The choice was his. Would he give in to the darkness and become the villain he feared? Or would he find a way to overcome the chaos, to fight back against the forces that sought to tear him apart? The answer was within his reach. But it wasn't going to be easy. It was going to take everything he had. And as the world around him continued to crumble, Nova took a deep breath and made his choice. But just as he was about to act, the ground beneath him cracked open, and he was pulled into the abyss. The abyss was darker than Nova had ever imagined, its depths pulling him down like a torrent, each passing moment dragging him further into the void. His heart pounded violently in his chest, echoing in his ears as the ground crumbled beneath him. For a split second, he was weightless, suspended between the past and the future, between the hero he had been and the dark reflection he was becoming. The swirling colors of the collapsing universe above him had vanished, replaced by an inky blackness that swallowed every trace of light. And in that suffocating silence, Nova realized he wasn't just falling through space. He was falling through himself. As the darkness closed in, he could feel the weight of his fear pressing down on him, suffocating him, dragging him deeper into his own psyche. The memories, the doubts, rushed forward like a flood, crashing into his mind with the force of a hurricane. Every mistake, every weakness, every moment of failure that had once seemed so distant was now at the forefront of his thoughts. The reflections in the mirror universe hadn't just been a physical manifestation of his fears. They had been pieces of him, fragments of the darkness he had tried so hard to hide, the parts of him he had never truly accepted. And now, they were coming for him. But then, something shifted. The void around him began to pulse with energy, a strange, unfamiliar light emerging from within the darkness. It wasn't the blinding flash that had torn through the mirror, but something softer, more subtle. It wasn't just a light. It was a presence, something that had always been with him but had been hidden beneath the layers of fear and doubt. The boy's voice, which had seemed so distant, was now clear, reverberating in Nova's mind like a mantra, guiding him through the darkness. "Asterisk, you are more than the darkness. Asterisk," the boy whispered, his voice soothing yet firm. "Asterisk, you are the choice you make in the face of fear. Asterisk." The words were simple, but they hit Nova like a jolt of electricity, snapping him out of the spiraling vortex of self-doubt. He could feel it now, the pulse of something inside him, a power greater than any force in the mirror universe. It wasn't his powers, not the energy manipulation or the strength he had always relied on. It was something deeper, something more human. It was his will to fight, his determination to rise above the chaos, no matter how impossible it seemed. He wasn't just battling the fracture. He was battling himself. With a fierce cry, Nova reached deep within, pushing past the darkness and the self-doubt that had held him captive for so long. His mind cleared, and he focused on the one thing that had always anchored him, the belief that even in the darkest of times, there was always a choice. He could choose to fight, to rise above the fear and chaos, to break free from the mirror universe and reclaim his true self. And then, like a light breaking through the storm, Nova felt it, the surge of power that came not from his hands or his body, but from his soul. The mirror universe, which had once his prison, began to shudder and crack, the very fabric of reality bending under the force of his will. He wasn't just trapped in the mirror anymore. He was changing it, bending it to his will, reshaping it from the inside out. The dark version of himself, his twisted reflection, stood before him smirking, as if Nova were nothing more than a passing inconvenience. But Nova wasn't afraid anymore. He had come to understand that the dark reflection wasn't a separate entity. It was a part of him, a manifestation of everything he had hidden from, everything he had feared. And now, he was ready to face it. "You're not me," Nova said, his voice steady and strong. "You never were." The dark Nova sneered. "Asterisk, you think you can defeat me? You think you can escape the darkness that's within you? Asterisk." Nova took a deep breath. "Asterisk, the darkness isn't who I am. It's just something I have to overcome. Asterisk." With a sudden movement, Nova thrust his hands forward, and the mirror universe trembled once more. This time, the light that surrounded him was pure and bright, burning away the shadows that had once held him captive. The dark Nova screamed, his form distorting as the very essence of the mirror universe began to unravel. Nova's reflection, the true reflection of who he was, began to take shape, a figure of light and strength, unbroken and whole. And then, in a flash, the darkness was gone. Nova stood at the center of the void, breathing heavily, his body shaking from the intensity of the battle. But he wasn't alone. The boy, the guide who had led him through this twisted universe, stood beside him, a soft smile on his face. Asterisk, you did it. Asterisk, he said, his voice filled with pride. Nova nodded, his chest swelling with relief. He had done it. He had faced the darkest parts of himself and had emerged victorious. But even as the mirror universe crumbled around him, a thought lingered in his mind, a question that he still didn't have the answer to. What would happen now? What would he do now that the battle was over, now that the mirror universe was no more? The boy seemed to read his thoughts. Asterisk, this is just the beginning. Asterisk, he said softly. Asterisk, the darkness is always going to be there, but it doesn't have to control you. You'll face it again, but next time, you'll be ready. Asterisk. Nova didn't speak. He didn't need to. He understood now. The battle was never truly over. It wasn't about defeating the darkness. It was about learning to live with it, to accept it, and to rise above it whenever it threatened to consume him. And as the last remnants of the mirror universe faded away, Nova felt something inside him shift, a sense of peace, of clarity. He wasn't perfect. He would never be perfect. But that was okay. He was whole, and that was enough. With a final glance at the boy, Nova turned and walked forward into the unknown, knowing that the journey ahead would be difficult, but that he was no longer afraid. He had faced the darkness, and he had won. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories of inner strength and resilience. Until next time, stay strong, stay brave, and never forget your worth.